All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Greg. Thrilled to have you presenting today, and welcome everybody to the Bulkley Valley Research Center seminar series. I'm hosting today from the traditional territory of the Gitumden clan of the Wet'suwet'en Nation, and I'm on the banks of the Bulkley River. Was just out for a beautiful walk today. A little bit disconcerting that it's +8, but it is nicer than -26. So I would like to thank some of the center funders that allow these seminars to happen and that have supported us recently with upgrading our technology. The Bulkley Valley Community Foundation, Bulkley Valley Credit Union, and Wet'suwet'en Community Forest. Very grateful to those supporters and as well to those of you who are members of the center. If you're not a member, I definitely encourage you to consider purchasing a membership. It definitely supports some of our core activities, of which our seminar series is an important part of. And Greg and I were just chatting before we got started here about, all of the innovations and the ideas and things that people have, and trying to find the time to connect and to share those out. And I know that's one of the things that people really love about the seminar series, that it's a chance to connect with new people. It's a chance to hear from people and put together a few more dots. And so we love doing the seminar series and are definitely committed to it. So thanks very much for joining. So thrilled to have Gregory today, and hearing from this paper that he recently published. It sounds like it was quite a collective of papers and teammates to get it to the fore. Greg is an assistant professor of forest management in the Department of Forest Resources Management at UBC, and he leads the FRESH Lab, which is a fabulous name, Forest Resources and Ecosystem Services Hub. He has professional forest experience as an RPF for over 2 decades, as well as academic credentials. His research interests lie at the intersection of forest science, forest economics, forest and industrial engineering, data science, computer science, and operations research. And it's a pleasure to host you today, Greg. Thanks so much for joining us, and very looking forward to this. Thanks so much.
Thanks for the introduction, Dawn, and it's a pleasure to be here. And I'm really glad for the invitation to come and talk about this work. What I'm going to present today, I've tried to keep it fairly high level, talking about issues and solutions in a way that I'm hoping will interest and inspire some conversations about forest management and the challenges therein. I'm going to stay relatively shallow on the details of the modeling because it's actually quite a complex model of models, so sort of a meta model that we used for this, and I know that the details of that are not going to interest everyone, but if you do want to know about that stuff, please just ping me after the talk. I'll be glad to jump onto Zoom one-on-one with anyone who's interested, and anything you want to know about what we did in the nitty-gritty of what's under the hood, I'll gladly take some time to explain that to you if it's something you're interested in. And also, I'm hoping that this talk will inspire some conversations that lead to fun new projects. So don't hesitate to reach out to me after today, or to ask questions afterwards. So the purpose of this talk, and the title is to look at the idea of combining thinning and diverse plantings to adapt to climate change-induced timber supply shortages. And this is something that we modeled actually in the Bulkley timber supply area, which is part of how we got invited to speak here today. But I would say that I could give this talk in several other parts of interior BC, and everything we're talking about here would be just as relevant. This is a big issue in so many places. So the paper that inspired the BVRC to invite me to talk today was published last year in the Canadian Journal of Forest Research. It's a collaboration by Valentine Lafaux, Adam Polenko, Cosmin Mann, Karen Diamond, myself, and Verena Gris. So If anybody wants that paper, it is fully open access on the Canadian Journal of Forest Research website. I'll be making this slide deck available to Dawn at BVRC afterwards in case she wants to share it. And please, do reach out to me if you've got any questions about the details of what's in that paper. So the context for my talk here, and those of you that are familiar with the forest sector, this won't be news. We have a very large forest in Canada, 362 million hectares, and $35 billion of GDP contribution from the forest sector, and a huge chunk of that is coming from British Columbia. 40% of industrial roundwood harvested in Canada is from BC. And 75% of that 40%, so fully 30% of the roundwood supply that's harvested in Canada annually comes from the interior, and Bulkley's part of the interior, and here we are back home. Okay, so I was just trying to do a little bit of a zoom in that, you all are kind of at the center of a really important supply nexus for a really impactful industrial system that is a big part of Canada's economy, but also the rural communities that operate it. And mountain pine beetle hit that interior British Columbia forest really hard, as you all know. The outbreak was essentially between 2005 and 2015, but it impacted communities for a full decade afterwards, at least, and killed about 50% of the lodgepole pine growing stock. It impacted over 18 million hectares, and that's a huge chunk of the 60 million hectares of total forest in British Columbia, almost a third. To react to this, companies and government changed their policies and their planning and built new mills and almost doubled the industrial processing capacity for roundwood to accommodate mountain pine beetle salvage. But with the salvage opportunities winding down, these beetle-killed trees don't last forever. They have a finite shelf life. We're seeing all across the interior of BC in the past 5 years, but most intensely in the past 2 or 3 years, the final tail of this mountain pine beetle volume AAC bump. It's done. The party's over. And so what do you do under this reduced timber supply new outlook going forward is a question that's on a lot of people's minds. In about 50 years from now, just the forest and industrial system should have pretty much totally recovered from this mountain pine beetle event and be back to business as usual in terms of timber supply. But for the next 50 years, many areas of British Columbia, including the Bulkley timber supply area, will be seeing a moderate but substantial and non-negligible reduction in timber supply relative to pre-mountain pine beetle levels that would have been applicable had that mortality event not occurred. So climate change is expected to have a large impact in forest growth, and in some stand types, this will increase growth rates and be a bit of a boon for net primary production. In other stand types, particularly drought-susceptible dry ecosystems, climate change is expected to exacerbate drought and drought-induced mortality and have a net negative effect on net primary production or growth rates. So this paper is trying to capture all those things. In order to try to mitigate those issues of mountain pine beetle-induced short or mid-term timber supply shortages, plus an exacerbation effect of climate change further reducing growth, thereby reducing timber supply during that same period, we're looking at what about? So we're just throwing three questions out there. We're not going to have any definitive answers for you at the end of this talk, but we're just courageously asking three questions. What about assisted migration, which is deliberate planting of tree species in areas that are not currently optimal from a physiological point of view, but that we're thinking will be a great place for that tree to grow at some point in the future if climate change goes the way we think it's going to go. Species diversification is just about planting a larger number and a different mix of species when we regenerate after final felling treatments in our forest management plans. And commercial thinning is usually something like 30% basal area removal, thinning from below, typically 2 to 3 decades before optimal rotation age, give or take, and depending on the prescription. So we have limited information about what these things can do individually, and we basically have no information at all about what happens when you put them all together in various combinations. So that's sort of what's being explored in this paper and this modeling exercise. So a toolkit framework was developed for a case study area, which is a part of the bulkly timber supply area. I'll show you a map in a few minutes. And we aim to assess the potential benefits of commercial thinning as a way to mitigate annual albel cut fall down, alternative planting regimes, including assisted migration and mixed species planting as a way to mitigate future climate change impacts, and to look at the combined effects of commercial thinning and alternative planting regimes on overall timber supply availability over time in the study area. So the study area that we're looking at is, you can see in the A subfigure in the top left that we have Smithers there, and that's the bulkly timber supply area in light gray. Just below that in the B subfigure, you see a gray outline of the bulkly timber supply area, and in bold black is our study area. It's a chunk of about 10 per 15% of that total area that includes Smithers on the eastern boundary. And the C and D subfigures show us the biogeoclimatic zone distribution in this area. And in the lower right-hand corner, we can see basically what we're trying to highlight here is non-TSA or non-forested is in white. So that's just not included in the model at all. The gray is our non-timber harvesting land base. So we simulate growth inside those stands, but we do not allow any harvesting in the model there. And the black area is our timber harvesting land base, where we simulate growth in the model and we allow various forms of harvesting and various flavors of planting. So we have about 100,000 hectares total. About 20% of it, or 18,000 hectares, is the timber harvesting land base. We have a relatively wide range of elevation from 450 to 2,500 meters of elevation. So you have also quite a sharp ecosystem gradient across that elevation change. And we have 3 dominant biogeoclimatic zones that we're simulating. So most of the trees in our area are the subalpine fir. The next most common species would be spruce and pine, some hemlock, and there's a few deciduous species as well. You can also see that the forest is relatively stacked with older stands. So on the far right-hand side of that B subfigure in the bottom right, you can see that a large fraction of the area for both the timber harvesting land base and the non-timber harvesting land base, which are in black and gray respectively, is in the 240 years old plus category. So here's the reason why I'm not going to get into a lot of detail regarding the model we built, because it's complicated. And it's not too complicated for any one of you to understand. If you really want to, please do reach out and I'll take all the time necessary to explain it. But there are a lot of little bits. So the big bits that I can explain are, if you look at this top right-hand corner over here, we have some growth and yield models that some of you who've done some modeling in British Columbia should be familiar with. We have VDYP, which is used in British Columbia to model growth and yield of first growth or unharvested stands. We have TIPSY, which is used to model plantation growth and yield in second growth stands. And we have task 3 here, which is the underlying model that's actually used to generate the growth and yield projections in TIPSY. We had to run task 3 all on its own to be able to accurately capture the commercial thinning treatment impact, because TIPSY just does straight plantation growth. It's not really good at handling bespoke commercial thinning parameters that capture the specific treatment that we wanted to model. So we had to go to task 3. We used VDYP and TIPSY to create some base yields. And those would be the standard models you would use to build a timber supply or forest estate model. We used Patchworks as the forest estate modeling framework. We could have used other forest estate modeling frameworks that are commonly used in practice, for example, Woodstock, and the results of this analysis would have essentially been the same. We take the base growth and yield curves that we generated with VDYP and TIPSY, and we apply growth curve modifiers to them to simulate the different growth trajectories we anticipate vis-a-vis different climate change scenarios. And that takes into consideration the different responses of different ecosystem types under climate change. So that was done using Landis. So that's the part of the modeling that refers to the Hoff et al. Paper from 2017, and that was led by Karen Diamond. So again, we use some fairly standard tools to generate growth and yield curves. We use a somewhat non-standard approach with task 3 to model some commercial thinning treatment responses as accurately as possible. We overlay growth modifiers on top of that were generated using some Landis simulations under climate change scenarios. And we mash all that up and feed it into Patchworks, which is one of several forest estate modeling frameworks we could have used to simulate growth and harvesting at the landscape scale. Other inputs to Patchworks include the administrative boundaries. We always need an initial forest inventory, and we have to put our timber objectives and our management prescriptions into there, including what treatments are available on what types of stands and what the response will be, etc. The output from this, which is what I'm going to show you in a minute, are some harvest schedules, including volume harvested over time across a 200-year planning horizon. Some remaining growing stock, so you sort of see what's left standing in the forest, and some sort of tracking of changing forest conditions as a result of these different scenarios we ran. So when I was talking about growth modifiers, I'm going to do a little bit of hand waving at this graph, and hopefully that'll clear things up for anyone who's still wondering what we're talking about. On the x-axis here, we have age. On the y-axis, we have cubic meters per hectare. The bold black line is just a standard growth and yield curve. They tend to look somewhat like this. This is just an example. We have several growth and yield curves with different shapes in the model. When you do a commercial thinning, say at this age of 125 years old approximately, you do a partial volume removal, and then it bounces back along this dotted line. What we've done is we've used task 3 to simulate that dotted line, but then we've translated that simulation into a growth curve modifier, which is the green dots, which is plotted along this right-hand side axis here, where if we have a modifier of 1, we're basically multiplying growth curves by 1, which means we're not doing anything to them. And if we multiply them by a coefficient less than 1, we smoosh them down a little bit. So we did some limited simulations in tasks to simulate commercial thinning response. And then we translated those to generic growth curve multipliers so that then we could apply that commercial thinning response to a large number of yield curves that were generated either with VDYP or TIPSY. So that's the hack we applied to be able to simulate commercial thinning everywhere, not just in the stands that we ran in tasks. Here's some examples of the growth curve multipliers that were generated from the Landis climate change sensitive scenarios. You can see, for example, that in this relatively dry SBS ecosystem, we get a large negative response of our yield curves relative to our bold black line, which is always the baseline scenario. So climate change makes things grow more slowly in this ecosystem. In this ecosystem here, for example, you can see that climate change did not really have a net primary production effect on the stand growth, but there was a strong response to diversification of species, which I'll get back to. I'm not super confident that this diversification effect, where we see this blue line here, this blue line here, this blue line here, that blue line there, are strong, positive, magic growth boosts from diversification. That may or may not be true in the real world, and I think we need a lot more work and some field trials to confirm that that's an actual thing and not just a modeling artifact. So here's the answer in case people were itching to know, all right, so what do we get when we put all this together? What we get is some harvest levels, cubic meters per year, as a function of time. So this is basically how the chief forester tends to present annual allowable cut scenario determination results or rationales in the timber supply review documents you see in British Columbia. So the bold black line is your baseline scenario where we just do business as usual, no commercial thinning, no climate change, no fancy planting, just straight up what we've been doing the whole time. And this dip in the first 50 years that slowly recovers up to year 100, this is what people are worried about. So this is what we're trying to mitigate or fix with a combination of diversified planting and commercial thinning. So starting from the bottom here, the solid red line is just simulating straight up climate change, but no new management options. So this red line is basically what this black trajectory would look like if you just add the missing effect for climate change. So that's bad news. The story gets worse, right? So the forest will grow more slowly and it just exacerbates this downward trend that we were already observing. Some good news, if we go red dotted line, if we layer on some commercial thinning treatments on top of this climate change trajectory, we get some of the wood back. Good. The bold green line here is if we do Douglas fir enhancement of plantations on top of climate change. Ooh, that's even better. So that's a good one, right? So we get a nice boost later, starting maybe 30, 50 years in the future. But it really doesn't solve our downward wood supply problem for the next 30 years. So if anybody's worried about what's going to happen in their career or their lifetime, yeah, we haven't fixed that yet. This is basically happening no matter what you do. What we're able to fix, though, is what happens from year 50 onward, right? And then so the dotted green line is climate change, the Douglas fir enhancement, plus some commercial thinning. Excellent. Now, for the first time, you can see we have a trajectory that pops up above the black line or baseline scenario. So we've managed to backfill some of that midterm timber supply shortage by combining diversification specifically Douglas fir enhancement in the plantations, plus some commercial thinning. And this cancels out the midterm timber supply shortage from mountain pine beetle and compensates for the reduced growth and climate change and still puts us ahead of our curve. So that's great news that there are options there. If we just do diversified plantings, no Douglas fir enhancement, no commercial thinning, we get this blue line here, the solid blue line, which is actually above the one I showed you before. So that's even better news. Apparently, just doing more diversified planting and no commercial thinning is like your second most powerful solution. And then if you combine commercial thinning and diversification, you get this dotted blue line at the top, which is starting to look pretty nice. Okay, so the next graph here just shows growing stock, which is the timber that we have not cut, that we leave standing in the forest. And you can see that there's quite a range there, but I don't want to focus on that one too much right now. The thing I really wanted to talk about was the previous slide, which was our timber volume harvest profiles. And that's about it for the results. We have lots of other results from this project, but I wanted to just keep it sort of high level. So to bring this back to a practical perspective of, all right, so who cares anyways? Focusing on commercial thinning, there is an opportunity to access the same timber we would otherwise have had access to under clear cuts, but a little bit earlier. This is because the model we've built is constrained such that the simulation is not even allowed to prescribe a clear cut before the optimal rotation age or the culmination of mean annual increment age. So this commercial thinning is the only means inside this modeling framework for accessing that timber early, which is why you get that positive response in the model, that timber boost in the midterm. There's some mitigation of midterm timber supply fall down, but it's definitely not making the problem go away. It's only making it slightly less bad. We have the same total timber supply. We're not increasing primary production. We don't get a magic growth boost in our model from commercial thinning. So that's not what you're seeing here. You're not seeing a magic growth boost. You're just seeing a shifting in time of what trees get harvested when. We did not consider similar effects from premature commercial or clear-cut treatments. What I'm trying to say here is we could have just let the model harvest with a clear-cut at a younger age, and we would have gotten an even maybe bigger boost in volume than what we did just with the partial harvesting of a commercial thinning treatment. And that was not modeled, but it would be trivial to rerun modeling scenarios using this exact framework and just nudge the operability age a little bit to the left and rerun the simulation and see what happens. It also does not consider the effect of commercial thinning on resistance and resilience to drought or pest, which has been reported as a potential benefit of commercial thinning, but we just haven't captured that in this simulation. However, if any of you are excited about the idea of doing that, I'm pretty sure it could be done in a similar or identical framework to the one we've used here. So if you want to look into that, let me know, and we might find some resources to roll those types of questions out. Similarly, to discuss a little bit the impacts of alternative planting regimes in our simulation here, our study focused on assisted migration and species diversification, but there's all sorts of other alternative planting things we did not model. For example, planting different densities, or planting in a staged way where you create multiple cohorts, or any number of stuff that silviculturally inclined people would be able to brainstorm. So we could also consider exploring some of those other options as well in future iterations of this modeling process. So if you're interested in that, let me know and we'll have a chat. Assisted migration only modeled here for Douglas fir. So we did not test assisted migration for other species. That could be a relevant thing to do in certain areas. So the simulation results you see here only show Douglas fir assisted migration, where we're preemptively planting it in areas that aren't great for Douglas fir right now, but that we think will be awesome for Douglas fir later. Species diversification is, in a way, if you could explain what is happening with species diversification and why should I believe that this works? Well, it is hedging bets with respect to climate change. The more diversification you get, the more statistical bet hedging you have in your strategy. So that's going to work no matter what, because it's just a fundamental sort of risk management strategy that works pretty much everywhere. Not putting all your eggs in one basket works. But the over-yielding effect that we specifically got in these simulation results from the exact way that Landis 2 responds to the combination of climate change and species diversification is possibly not a real thing that we would observe in the real world. And we don't have any field data to either refute or deny that, or to confirm or deny that. So we need some field trials. I don't have any funding to do those field trials right now, but I'm hoping that that'll come up in the future. So on the combined effects of commercial thinning and alternative planting, the way we've built our model, the combinations that I showed you in the harvesting plot are essentially additive. So we're just taking effect 1 and we're stacking it on top of effect 2, and then sometimes we put effect 3. My point is there are no interactions. It's not multiplicative, or things don't cancel out or dampen or amplify each other. Whereas in the real world, I'm almost certain that there are some forms of interactions, and I could take some reasonable guesses as to what they might be, but we haven't modeled any of those interactions here. So that would be a thing that definitely needs to be done before we put too much stock in these results being an accurate representation of what we can expect in the future. So I think we would need a completely different modeling approach. The framework we're using is essentially a deterministic linear optimization modeling framework, and having stochastic or random nonlinear effects of interactions is going to be awkward using Patchworks or any other software framework that's built like that. So I would guess that doing a hybrid approach where you use a model that's well designed for capturing nonlinear stochastic effects like Landis or Sellies or Spades, and mashing that up with a model like Patchworks and having them run iteratively, kind of feeding back into one another. That would be my best guess of where to go next to capture those types of effects. So perspectives, reconciling professional forestry and scientific ecology modeling tools is one of the things that we've attempted to break the ice on in this project. And this is a pretty good example of some of the powerful new insights you get when you can put a model like Landis, which is mostly just used for science and research, and a model like Patchworks, which is essentially built for and used by professionals, and you put them together, you get some interesting new things. There's some barriers to the development of climate-sensitive growth and yield models, and we really need to address that question head-on, not just in the Bulkley area, but in Canada as a whole. Until we really wrap our heads around how to simulate climate-sensitive growth projections, we're going to be doing a weak flavor of sustainable long-term forest management modeling, and there's no way around that. There's some ongoing national scale and multi-partner initiatives led by the Canadian Forest Service that are aiming at fostering development of climate-sensitive growth and yield models. So that's good news. The bad news is those initiatives haven't yielded, production-ready models that we can just roll out tomorrow morning, but good progress has been made in the last little while, and I'm looking forward to being able to start working some of that into at least my research prototypes in the near future. So ongoing work at the UBC Fresh Lab, which I lead, is developing open innovation hub concept where forest ecosystem and forest product modeling can happen simultaneously. And it's a place where I really hope to exchange between scientists and practitioners so that we can accelerate the innovation life cycle and roll out some meaningful, upgraded decision-making and modeling solutions to real world situations ASAP. So one thing we're working on that is sort of actively under development is linking these stochastic simulation models like SPADES with deterministic optimization models like WS3 or Patchworks to get those iterative feedback loops to start capturing some of those non-linear interactions that I was talking about earlier. We're working on it. So we have some early results, and hopefully we'll get invited back someday to your research seminar series to show you some of those cool things when they're ready for revelation to the world. So I'm gonna put a picture of a pretty bird up, and I'll gladly answer any questions you have at this point.
Thanks very much, Greg. Yes, it definitely sounds like we will be having you back in the future.